Indianapolis Colts travel down to Baltimore to face the Baltimore Ravens in what should be a very interesting battle. I want to welcome on a special guest from the Believe in Ravens podcast, also front page contributor to the Windy City Gridiron as well, Kyrie Thompson. Kyrie, thanks for coming on, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing. That's why I've been telling everybody this. I'm doing. I'm trying to get to Friday, and just try to get to football. I mean, football's tonight, so you know what? We're good. As long as once the football starts, then I can enjoy myself a little bit.
Absolutely, man. And it looks to be a very interesting battle on Sunday between the Colts and the Ravens. Both these teams kind of dealing with some injuries right now. I mean, it seems like, especially the Ravens with their running back room. It seems like it's about a yearly occurrence, man, at this point. The Ravens have one or multiple guys out for an extended period of time. Obviously, J.K. Dobbins out for the year. You just feel for that guy, man. It's just talk about just bad luck with the injury bug. I mean, my goodness, it's just very unfortunate for a guy like J.K. Dobbins, who's a great player when he's healthy, but that's just been the issue, man.
Yeah, and I think that this was something the Ravens planned for in the offseason. So that's why you bring in the undrafted free agent, Keaton Mitchell, who was electric in the preseason, but also on injured reserve. He's hurt right now with a shoulder injury or collarbone injury. And then you had Melvin Gordon come in and get some snaps in the preseason. They put him on the practice squad, but he's available now as a backup. And then they go ahead and sign Kenyon Drake to the practice squad. So it's like they know how difficult it's been for the last couple of years to keep their running backs healthy. And then you have Justice Hill, who is probably the starter, like the number one guy they were going to put out there first. Justice Hill has a toe injury that might keep him out of this game. So it's like, honestly, being a Ravens running back got to be one of the most dangerous jobs in the NFL, man.
I feel that, man. We've dealt with our share of injuries over the years too, so totally understand it. But it feels like Baltimore. It's like Baltimore and San Francisco for whatever reason. It feels like every year there's just all these different players getting injured. So definitely feel for you guys there. Who are some guys that you're kind of monitoring that you're not 100% sure how they're going to go, if they're going to play or not?
The unfortunate thing is that there are a lot of DNPs on that injury report. One guy that I'll say, hopefully you're going to see him is Devin Duvernay, kick returner, backup wide receiver. He was at least limited participation with a shoulder injury. Jadeveon Clowney is listed on there as an illness. He didn't practice, but that generally says that, okay, you feel better by the end of the week. You can go ahead and give it a go. Like I said, Justice Hill, sounds like there's a toe injury that might keep him out. They might go ahead and just play it safe and roll with Gus Edwards and the running back depth that they've got. Odell Beckham Jr., I think we heard that the ankle injury that he had isn't necessarily that serious, so maybe they're just keeping him out, out of an abundance of caution, because obviously he hasn't played a whole lot in the past couple of years. Give him the day off of practice. He's a veteran. He knows what he's doing. So it'll be interesting to see if he practices on Thursday and Friday. I think that'll go a long way to determining if he plays. But then, Odafe Owe, that's an issue. Him propping up with an ankle injury and not practicing. That's a guy that I think you need him. He's your best pass rusher. So you got to see him practice in some form or other over the next couple of days. And there are a lot of people who are probably just going to be out. Marlon Humphrey, we're kind of waiting and seeing on Marlon Humphrey because he's not on IR. There is some speculation he'd probably be back relatively early in the year, but I don't think he's going to go against the Colts most likely. Might not see him till week 4 or 5. And then Tyler Linderbaum, the starting center, I think they might go ahead and let him rest as well. He had an ankle injury that he went out with in week 1. They had Sam Mustipher step in. He was with the Chicago Bears for a little while. Very maligned by the fan base, but he went out and played some pretty solid football in week 2 against the Bengals. So maybe you just go ahead and trust that. And then left tackle, right? So you're probably going to be missing Ronnie Stanley. I don't know when he'll be back. It's already tough for the Ravens, but the good part about it is that their depth pieces have played well enough to cover it. You need those guys back later on in the year, and I think that the beginning part of the schedule is at least chill enough, and especially since you're sitting at 2-0, it's chill enough to where you could say, we don't need you back right now, so let's go ahead and give you a rest. So you'll probably see a short-handed, but probably still very good Ravens team on Sunday.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting, just considering I feel like the Colts the last couple weeks have kind of taken advantage of some injuries, specifically on the offensive line. Last week with Houston, just basically down to their scrubs, like to the third string guys about everywhere. Indianapolis was able to take full advantage. They're able to really do that in week one against Jacksonville. We're able to really dominate the line of scrimmage. So those are the two that I'm going to be interested in. Ronnie Stanley, and then you mentioned Linderbaum at center. Like if those guys can't go, could that be a very interesting matchup to watch? And then obviously talk about Owe as well, the pass rusher. That one is one that I'm watching as well. So those are some key injuries there clearly for the Baltimore Ravens. Now the Indianapolis Colts, just so you know, today they didn't practice. Anthony Richardson didn't practice with the concussion. Ryan Kelly went out with a concussion as well. Quentin Nelson with the toe, and Kenny Moore with a knee were not practicing. I will add, though, they were both on the injury report last week and did suit up, Kenny Moore and Quentin Nelson. So I do feel like they're just giving them rest at this time. But I really think the two ones that are probably trending to doubt for are Richardson and Ryan Kelly right now. So Colts are decently healthy. When it comes to that, unfortunately, the two big injuries they have are two key pieces right now and two guys who are playing very well for them. And again, heading into this game, man, you look at the weather in this matchup. I mean, it's supposed to be a tropical cyclone that's set to hit not just Indy and Baltimore, but the Jets versus the Patriots in Washington versus Buffalo. So, man, this could be a slog of a game. It could be very, very difficult to really do a whole lot offensively in this game. So it may come down to the trenches. How do you feel about the weather in this game, and how much do you think it'll be a factor in this matchup?
Well, it certainly seems like there's going to be some fairly torrential downpour. Now, I think that one thing that might help is it sounds like there's the tropical storm coming up the East Coast. By the time it gets to Sunday, it sounds like the worst of it might be gone from the East Coast. It'll start heading up a bit towards the Northeast where we are. But I mean, I would expect that it's probably going to be really soggy over there. Maybe you'll get the remnants of some rain, maybe not necessarily the worst of it. So that could definitely help you tarp over the field and try and keep as much moisture off it as possible. But look, yeah, especially if it's overcast, if it's still raining, which is what I mean, I'd have to check and see, because especially out here. So I'm located, out on the East Coast. The forecast can lie every once in a while, but I think that probably what you're going to want to see from what the Ravens will want to do anyway is establish the run and try and get something going with the ground game. Gus Edwards and Justice Hill both each had some solid starts to the game. Gus Edwards had a rushing touchdown. He had a big run also, so it was a very nice showing for him. And I think especially when you have doubts about whether certain guys can pass protect particularly well. I mean, I think that the Ravens, I mean, they threw the ball really well on this last Sunday against the Bengals. So I don't think that's necessarily something like, I don't know if we can throw the football. But when you've got especially backup offensive linemen, you want to be able to build their confidence by getting downhill and running the football. And again, Gus Edwards, big physical back, and then you've got a bunch of veterans like Kenyon Drake and Melvin Gordon that can get downhill, they can run the football. And Lamar Jackson, they kept Lamar Jackson from running in the design game in week 1, but they started to give him a couple more design carries in week 2. Obviously, they want to keep the burden off his legs a little bit and keep him healthy. But I think especially when you have a game plan that kind of makes things a little bit tougher to air it out, I think you're going to see a little bit more of Lamar Jackson specifically running the football in this game. And that's dangerous. It is dangerous for any team facing him, because it's not even necessarily that he's just like the fastest runner in the world. I mean, obviously he's fast, especially for a quarterback, but he's just so slippery and elusive, and he's hard to get down on the ground. So especially when you can turn you get an extra blocker in the run game by using the quarterback. I mean, the Ravens do it better than just about anybody else. Doesn't matter that they don't have Greg Roman in there anymore. They can still get it done with Lamar on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, we all know how difficult it is to stop a player like Lamar Jackson on the ground. I will say again, I know it's against not great opponents. Against Jacksonville's pretty good, but Houston especially. The Colts have actually been able to do a pretty good job, all things considered, of being able to really shut down run games. Like a week ago against Houston, Dameon Pierce wasn't even averaging 2 yards a carry. It was that bad, and so you have players like DeForest Buckner in there, who everybody pretty much knows at this point. He's a beast out there. You have Kwity Paye, you have Samson Mabukum out there. So the Colts have a pretty good unit, all things considered, especially I think in the run game department. So it's kind of going to be interesting because it's going to be the strength on strength in certain ways of who's ultimately going to break. What's going to happen here? Are the Colts going to be able to limit Lamar? You can never fully stop a player like that. Like, are they going to be able to limit him with how well they played so far, or is that going to be an issue for them going into this game? I'm really interested to see that Baltimore running game with Lamar Jackson, with all your running backs, versus this Indianapolis Colts defense that have been playing extremely well, especially against the run as of recent.
And I think that, especially when you look at what the forecast is going to be, it's maybe more showers and then cloudier as the day goes on Sunday in Baltimore. That's what's projected. We'll see how that goes, see if it clears up a little bit sooner. But the other thing to counteract that Baltimore's been doing a lot of are, end arounds and smoke screens to their wide receivers, getting them the ball in space and kind of making it a little bit more difficult for the defensive line to kind of tee off in the passing game and making you defend the edges. And the guy that they have been doing that with, especially, is Zay Flowers. He is difficult to deal with when you get the ball in his hands. He is quick. His cuts are severe. I mean, he's over here leaving people's ankles still attached to the turf. You know what I mean? And being able to take the top off of the defense. So if they feel like they can throw the ball, I think they're going to, in order to, I think, maybe not put all the burden on a running back group that's already pretty stressed out because you don't want to lose more people. But I think the other part of it is throwing a little bit of RPO game, throwing a little bit of quick screen game. So as to protect that offensive line a little bit more against, as you mentioned, a defensive front that's got some players on it. And again, for me, as somebody who's watched a lot of Sam Mustipher, and, as somebody who's seen how good Ronnie Stanley can be, I mean, and the fall off that can happen when you've got injured tackles, you don't want to tempt fate too much. You want to keep opponents honest. So if the Ravens decide, oh, yeah, I'm just going to run all the time and ditch the passing game that started to emerge in week 2, I don't know that that's necessarily the way that they want to do things. And I don't think that you want to necessarily run Lamar Jackson a lot. So I mentioned there weren't that many designed runs in week 1, and they had 3 designed carries in week 2 from what I could see on Pro Football Focus, and obviously scrambled a couple of times. That's another thing you got to keep an eye out for in the passing game, is Lamar pulling it down and running. But I think that if they can do it, they're going to try and stress the Colts on the edge and try and get mismatches with those cornerbacks in space.
I think that is the big one that you guys will have a major advantage of, is if there's a weak point on this Indianapolis defense, it is 100% their quarterbacks. I mean, 2 guys that are completely new that barely played last year. DJ Baker, who is technically cornerback 1. If you ask a lot of Colts fans, and if you ask me, based off he played last week, I think he should be probably cornerback 5 at this point. He was pretty rough. He allowed Nico Collins over 140 yards in the air. So, if Zay Flowers is lined up on him, or if Odell plays in this game, I think that's a big one that you guys can really take advantage of. Really young and inexperienced at corner right now. And I think you guys have a big advantage here. If you're able to stress out those corners, I really do think that could be a big, matchup in your guys' favor in this matchup.
Yeah, and again, I mentioned Zay Flowers. It'll be interesting to see if Odell Beckham Jr. can suit up. But Rashad Bateman is back, and then Devin Duvernay, if he's able to give it a go. Nelson Aguilar was a guy that really flew under the radar in terms of offseason signings. He was with the New England Patriots the last couple of seasons, and that didn't necessarily work out particularly well in New England, but he looked like he had a rapport going with Lamar Jackson in one of his touchdown throws. I mean, it was just like perfect execution on every end. And so they have not just a couple of potential stars, right, in terms of Odell Beckham Jr. and then Zay Flowers, an emerging star, but they've got good depth, right? And that's something that the Ravens haven't had in a long time. And so that makes them especially dangerous to a team like the Colts, because in the past, right, a couple of years ago, when they came back and beat the Colts, right, they were throwing to, I mean, it's mainly Mark Andrews, somebody we haven't even talked about yet. That's another big one. That's another big target here. But it's like Mark Andrews and like Hollywood Brown and names like that. But now when you start talking about guys on the outside and they're using it a lot, they're using a lot of 3 receiver sets, which is something they didn't do a ton of in the past couple of years. There's definitely a philosophical change here, and they want to be able to take advantage of the speed and explosiveness they now have on the outside. So look, if the weather is at all conducive to it, even if it's not necessarily something they want to push the ball down the field and take a lot of chances with, they're going to try to get those guys involved, try to get the blocking out there and say, okay, go try and catch Zay Flowers. We can't do it in practice. Now it's your turn.
Yeah, that'll definitely be a very interesting matchup that I'm watching in this game. And I think weather, I mean, if you're rooting for the Colts, and I think for the Colts advantage, you want the weather to be nasty. You want it to be sloppy, because you don't. Yeah, with how poor your corners have played and really how poor your secondaries played, especially last week, it would do you a great advantage to not, basically have Baltimore's passing game not eliminated, but severely handicapped because of the weather. So we'll see on that one. But if it's not too bad, I definitely worry about that 100% when it comes to Baltimore's weapons versus the Indianapolis players who are going to try to cover them. I don't think it's going to go in their favor. So that'll be interesting for sure. You mentioned Mark Andrews. Got to talk about him as well. I mean, we have to. He's one of the best tight ends in football. I do feel a little bit better in this matchup. It's kind of weird because I think Mark Andrews is the best player the Ravens have receiving wise, but I feel like the Colts have, I'm not saying they're going to stop him, but I think they have some players that can. I feel a little bit more confident in their ability to cover him than I do versus the corners, because they do have players like Shaquille Leonard. They have EJ Speed, Zaire Franklin, all these guys, really the 2 guys, Franklin and Speed, playing at really high levels right now. And so that'll be an interesting matchup that I'm watching in this game, because, how do you slow down a player like Mark Andrews, who's just purely, one of the best tight ends in football?
And somebody who's got a great rapport with Lamar Jackson. Like, that's the other part of this is I think the passing game especially took off. It was a little uneven in week 1, but it took off with Mark Jackson in there, or Mark Andrews, I should say, because you can't necessarily key on just, okay, now I'm going to take away the receivers, so I'm going to take away the run game. Now you've got to deal with all of it. And I would say this, you can devote some extra attention to Mark Andrews, and I think that he merits that, because I think that overall I agree that he's their best pass catching option. I would caution, though, that the drop off between Mark Andrews and the next best pass catching option, which I would consider to be Zay Flowers, is not nearly as steep as it was. So there is going to be a bit of a pick your poison. I do think that I think that if you want to pick one guy to take away, that maybe it probably should be Mark Andrews, because Lamar Jackson will throw to him all day, every day, and will be happy to do it. And also Mark Andrews is a little bit on the hobbled sides. That might be a bit easier to do. And then especially depending on the weather, make them push it out and throw outside the numbers. I'm just saying, I mean, you could take away, this is one of those things where, I mean, Mark Andrews only had 45 yards receiving last week, and the Ravens still went off. You know what I mean? So it's like you still have to be careful about these aren't the Ravens of 2 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. It'll be an interesting battle to watch in this game. So we'll see what happens with that, with the passing offense versus this passing defense, and then just all those things in general. Let's move on, man, to the Colts offense for a minute. So this is a very interesting matchup, because Anthony Richardson right now, with the concussion he suffered last week and not looking like he's going to probably play in this game. Same with center Ryan Kelly as well, who also had a concussion. So it may be Gardner Minshew and Wesley French in there at quarterback and center. Gardner Minshew played pretty well last week against Houston. He's always been one of those nice backups to have, one of those guys that can be a spot starter, like he might have to be in this week. But when it comes to what the Colts want to do offensively, I mean, Shane Steichen, obviously new here to Indianapolis, a very good play caller so far through the first couple of weeks. We know what he did with Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia. But if it is Gardner Minshew in this game, how does that change your perspective of how you view this Colts offense in this matchup?
It definitely makes it seem less scary. I would certainly say. I mean, not necessarily that you're scared of Anthony Richardson, but there's the element there of, yeah, I mean, this guy's learning and we're going to blitz him a lot, but he's got a very good arm and he can run the ball. And it's like, hey, we got to look at that in the same way that we look at Lamar Jackson. It's dangerous. Gardner Minshew is a guy who's got moxie, right? He's definitely hung in there, been tough, and won some games in his career that people didn't necessarily expect him to win. But he's a bit more predictable. He's going to largely be in the pocket. He'll move around and try to buy time with his legs, but he's not going to kill you that way. You'll take that if you're gonna make him do anything. Yeah, sure, make him run around. And I think that they are probably just like they would do with Anthony Richardson. They're going to come after Gardner Minshew. They're going to be sending the linebackers Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen hunting for him because they are two of the best blitzing linebackers in the league. And I think the other thing, too, is that even though the Ravens are struggling with some injuries right now, they don't have Marlon Humphrey, the best cornerback on the team, and they don't have Marcus Williams, one of their starting safety, and he might be out a while. Even though they don't have those guys, they stood really tall against a very dynamic Bengals receiving core last week. I mean, you had Rocky Yassin going toe-to-toe with Jamar Chase and ripping the ball out of his hands in the end zone. I mean, this is a tough group to go up against. So I don't love the chances for either one of their quarterbacks, but I think especially with Gardner Minshew, I mean, look, in week one, I mean, for really the first couple of weeks, but I think even week one, I was thinking about this with CJ Stroud, right? He handled it very well against the Ravens, who were just coming after him and pressuring him all day long, but didn't get a whole lot going. And Joe Burrow, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, primarily a pocket guy, didn't get a whole lot going. Remember, they got 7 points off of a punt return touchdown. When you take that away, the Ravens would have won that game by double digits. So that's kind of something to keep in mind, is that they've been handling your conventional quarterbacks pretty well to start the year.
Well, I will say this: that the Colts, obviously depending what happens with Ryan Kelly, the Colts offensive line's played extremely well through 2 weeks. They've been one of the top units when it comes to protecting the quarterback. They started to, get the running game going a little bit more here in week number 2 against Houston, which Houston, I think, did a pretty good job. And maybe you can speak to this, of really containing that Baltimore running game in week number 1. And the Colts were able to take advantage of that. Not like they had all these huge 30, 40-yard runs, but consistently 5, 6, 7 yards a carry with Zach Moss, who will probably get, again, the primary amount of carries here. He's just a tough guy to take down in general. With how good the Colts offensive line has been playing, I know Baltimore has a pretty good defense in both capacities through the first couple weeks. Do you see this being a scenario where the Colts try to just, do what they've done and really run the ball down the Baltimore Ravens' throat and really try to help out Gardner Minshew in this passing game in this game?
I feel like that's absolutely necessary, not just to help out Gardner Minshew, but also to keep Lamar Jackson and the Ravens off the field. Because make no mistake about it, even if they've got some injuries, they have major explosive potential. And if you give them the ball too many times, they are going to put up big time numbers on you. And so I think you got to get Zach Moss and you got to get Deion Jackson, whomever running backs you're going to have. I mean, Colts running backs dropping like flies too. Obviously don't even have, Jonathan Taylor because of the contract situation. You don't have, Evan Hull, who was a guy that, looked like he impressed a little bit, and, he's lost to a torn meniscus now for the season. And so you got to do whatever you can with, pony up behind Quentin Nelson and say, let's go over there on the left side and get downhill. Because I think ultimately it becomes psychological to a point. If you can just run the ball, and you're getting 4 and 5 yards a pop, and you can just take tons of time off of the clock that prevents, again, the opposing, explosive opposing offense off the field, but it also wears down the defense. I feel like that's why you hear so many teams talk about the importance of running the football. We're like, oh yeah, the modern NFL, you got to throw. It's true. It's the most efficient way to be an explosive offense and be a great offense. But running the football still has a ton of value in this game. And so to me, that's the way that the Colts could potentially hang around in this game or make things difficult, is if you come out punching the Ravens in the mouth and the Ravens aren't quite ready for it. Problem is, it's kind of hard to catch the Ravens lacking. I feel like they didn't get caught off guard by a really, really terrible Texans team. So they're probably going to bring the A game against the Colts too. But if you can just bring a haymaker or two with you in the running game, could make things interesting. And again, Gardner Minshew's a veteran quarterback. He's a guy, like I said, he's a guy that knows how to run offense, knows how to manage games. So if you don't put it all on him, then he can make a throw here or there. I mean, you still got Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce. Like, you've got guys that can make plays in the passing game. So, I mean, the odds don't look great for the Colts, I would say, in this game. But look, any given Sunday, you can catch a team with a right hook early on and get a little momentum. Now it's just going to be about the Colts finishing those kinds of games and not allowing the largest comeback in like NFL history like they did last year.
Well, I will say it does help not having an ESPN personality, a head coach now. Shane Steichen, I'll say this, man. I know it's only been 2 weeks, but this dude's legit. Like, it was crazy because I was thinking about the Colts in the years past with under Frank Reich and just how unprepared they looked at times. And look, I'm not saying the Colts are going to go out there and win 10 to 12 games this year, but like what I am saying is they are more competitive in this game. I mean, they were leading Jacksonville going into the fourth quarter. They were pretty much dominating Houston, even though the score doesn't look necessarily like that. They were pretty much dominating, Houston. So I think this will definitely be their biggest test, going down to Baltimore, having to play potentially in some nasty conditions. But I will say this, man, the Colts, I don't know if they're going to win this game, but I feel like they are definitely not going to be, a team that gives up like they did last year. They're not going to allow those things as much. It's not going to be to that degree. And I think that is in large part due to just the new culture set by Shane Steichen. And so it'll be interesting. I think it will be a battle for sure. And those are some of the best ones, even if you don't win those all the time. I feel like the Colts are going to come and they're going to bring their best. They have the first 2 weeks, and while they may not be the most talented team in the world, I think on paper, Baltimore definitely has them, in some areas. But I don't know, man. Like you said, any given Sunday, you never know what can happen in today's NFL. So
that's right.
It's going to be a fun one, man. What do you think in this matchup are 3 keys that you think will ultimately, determine who comes out as the winner in this game?
Time of possession, because if the Colts are keeping the Ravens offense off the field, I think that is, okay, there could be context to this, right? Because I think if the Colts are keeping the Ravens off the field and dominating time of possession, that could be obviously a very good thing. Then again, maybe it could also mean the Ravens are scoring really, really fast and the Colts keep on having the ball kicked to them. So, but I think that more likely I'm thinking of it in terms of time of possession. Are the Colts able to run the football and extend drives and keep the ball out of Lamar Jackson's hands? Number 2, I want to see. I think for both teams, I'm gonna want to see sacks and pressure stats, right? Because as you mentioned, you've got a couple of injuries on both sides of the offensive line, but I think the Colts line is a little bit more whole than the Ravens are. So if you're getting a lot of pressure on Lamar Jackson, are you getting him to the ground? I think that's gonna be the big thing, because you can get pressure on him, but getting him on the ground is an entirely other thing. You got to maintain your rush lanes when you're coming after Lamar Jackson, because he's so slippery, and when he gets out, you don't want to be one-on-one in the open field with Lamar Jackson. It's probably not going to work out well for you. You got to bring everybody to the ball when he gets out in space. But again, I've seen games in which teams do bring down Lamar. Like, for example, I remember covering the Ravens versus the New England Patriots last year, and they had 3 sacks on Lamar Jackson in the first half. Might have even been more than that. And the offense sputtered. But then, of course, they came out in the second half and blew the doors off the Patriots. But, that's a whole other thing. And then the third thing, again, I've mentioned his name, Zay Flowers. The guy has 140 receiving yards already this year, hooked up with Lamar Jackson on a big-time deep ball in week 2. What is his role going to be? Because I feel like we could talk about the running game. We could talk about Mark Andrews. That guy is a weapon and quite possibly the X factor to this Ravens offense, because he just has a skill set that nobody else has. So what are the Ravens doing with him? How often, how many touches is he getting? How is he getting those touches? Are they quick screens? Are they getting him the football down the field? Is he getting a lot of yards after the catch? I think that you can probably survive if Mark Andrews has like 50, 60 yards receiving. But if Zay Flowers has like 8 catches for 80-something yards, you're probably in trouble.
Okay. Awesome, man. Well, last thing we'll do, I really do appreciate your time and coming on. Last thing we always like to do is have a score prediction for the game. Since you were the guest, I will let you go first. What is your score prediction for this week number 3 matchup?
All right. So taking weather into account, let's go ahead and say something to the effect of like 23 to 13.
Okay. See, I was going back and forth between like 27-16 or 24-13. Something around there is kind of where I'm going. I do think this Indianapolis Colts team, this is clearly the best defense they've seen so far. And I do think that will be a factor in this game. I think maybe they're in certain ways they may come back to some reality and come back to some, because they have been so good on the offensive defensive line, but you look at some of the competition they played, hasn't necessarily been the greatest, especially last week. So I do think it'll be a tough game for them offensively. If they can get the running game going, though, which is obviously a big one with time of possession, it gives them a fighting chance in this game. I don't think they'll ever go away, but I ultimately think talent will, come through at the end of the game. I think it might be tight through, 3 quarters or something, kind of like the Jacksonville game. And then ultimately Baltimore's talent, Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, all those guys kind of just take over a little bit. And you see, hey, we still got a ways to go before we want to compete, before we feel like we can compete, with the AFC's elite teams here. So, but it'll be a good game nonetheless. I'm really interested to see. I consider it a win if Indianapolis can hang with Baltimore for a good chunk of this game. But, it's very obvious that Baltimore is the more superior team in terms of talent. But, again, you never know, man. You never know.
That's what I'm saying. Because, look, in week 1, and again, maybe you could say everybody was rusty, but the Texans hung around in that game against the Ravens. So it was not what the final score ended up showing was like, oh yeah, double-digit win, but that kind of came later. It was definitely a tough game. And I think the Colts are, they're a tough team, and they've got a lot of promise, I think, with the youth that they've got. So yeah, I also expect it to be a solid game, especially like I said, if it's a little wet out there. But it's funny too, because I gave the score prediction. I didn't even say who I thought was going to win, but I guess we all know I think the Ravens are going to win.
Yeah, for sure. Well, man, I do appreciate it. Kyrie, why don't you tell everybody, I mentioned at the beginning, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, find your work and all that stuff?
Absolutely. So you can find me on the Believe in Ravens podcast. I'm on there usually with my guy, former Ravens tight end, Danny Wilcox, and also I am a contributor with Windy City Gridiron covering the Chicago Bears. And my main job is hanging out at a WBUR in Boston, where I occasionally have thoughts about the New England Patriots. So I kind of just talk about everybody.
Yeah, you're kind of a little everywhere on the East Coast, man. That's awesome. So really cool. Well, man, thank you so much. Really do appreciate it. I tell all our guests this, so I guess I'll tell you as well. Good luck on Sunday, but not too much luck because we always are hoping for a Colts win here. But really do appreciate it, man, and it's going to be a good one.
Absolutely, I agree. And hey, same to you. Go Ravens.
Hey, go Colts.